Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And welcome to the Help Me I'm Middle-Aged podcast.
Where you can find fun, exciting things about being middle-aged.
Oh, you're going to find things about us and about yourself you never thought you knew.
Hold on, come along for the ride. It's going to be fun. Welcome. My name is Rob.
And my name is Rob, too.
And welcome to the Help Me I'm Middle-Aged podcast. Today our guest is Linda Maloney. How are you, Linda?
I'm good. How are you, Rob and Rob?
Hello there.
It's easy, just one name.
Especially after you get to be middle-aged, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You forget it. It's Rob. We make it keep it simple here.
Yeah.
Well, today, Linda wrote a wonderful book called Military Fly Moms. I didn't want to get the name wrong. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that. You have this great, interesting life story, and we've done a lot of research on you, Linda.
Have you?
And
Hopefully it's all good stuff.
It's all good stuff.
Yeah.
We've scoured the internet. There's only glowing things.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about this, what you've done, your career after the military. But if we could just maybe take a step back and find out what drove you into service for our country. And you know what, I was even thinking about this, Rob, because when you're the host and you're new at being a host, you don't want to forget the most important things. We'd like to thank you for your service to our country.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
For keeping all of us safe.
Yep.
So
I'd do it all over again. I loved it so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you were 20 years, right?
Yes, 20
Okay.
years to the day.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow, that's awesome. So what was your passion to go into the military?
So when I was growing up, my mom worked for the airlines, and I always had this thing about airports. I used to love to go to the airport. And so when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, there wasn't a lot of money to go to college. Mm-hmm. And so my sister had gone into the Navy. When she graduated, she was a year ahead of me. And so I started looking at the military, and one of the jobs that was available was an air traffic controller. And that appealed to me because of my love of airports. So I took the test. I went in right after high school. My first duty station was Hawaii. Fort Island. So I used to take the little ferry. I know.
Nice beginning.
Yeah, it was very cool. And so I had my very first supervisor. His name was Chief Dickinson. And he saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. At that point, I was 18. And he encouraged me to apply for an officer program. Yeah. And so I did, and I got accepted. And long story short, I ended up with a ROTC scholarship at the University of Idaho. And my parents were like, Ida, what? Where is that? 'Cause I was from the East Coast. But it was a great school for me, and great military community. And so I got my degree in computer science engineering. And as soon as I graduated from college, I got my commission as an ensign and then went to flight school in the Navy.
Nice.
So as I was doing some of the research, there weren't a lot of women doing what you were doing in the military at the time. I mean, very, very low percentages, like under 10%.
I got my I got my wings in 1987. I was the only woman in my flight school class, and I was a right seater, a naval flight officer. My eyes were not 20/20, and I think at the time they were. And so you were either a pilot or a naval flight officer in the Navy.
Right.
And so I was a naval flight officer, and at the time they were accepting 10 in per year. And so I was
10 women?
10 women as a naval flight officer. There were more pilots they would accept in as women. And this was before the combat exclusion law was repealed.
Yeah.
And the combat exclusion law basically prohibited women from flying in combat. You could fly in a combat-related aircraft in a support type squadron, but not in a combat situation. So I graduated at the top of my class in flight school, and you can imagine how frustrated I was that I then was relegated to a support squadron, because I wanted, just like all the women who went through flight school, they were there because they wanted to fly for the military. They wanted to fly in combat if the situation arose. So I went to a support squadron in Key West, Florida, and I, along with many other women, many senior women leaders, we advocated for the combat exclusion law to be repealed, which it was in 1993.
Right.
And then at that point, I was able to go to a combat squadron. But a little bit, so my first squadron was in Key West, which was another great, wonderful
Yeah, you really pick them
place.
well.
Yeah,
I know.
Not like Anchorage, Alaska or anything.
I'm starting to notice,
And I flew in the two-seater A7 and the EA6A. I was in that squadron for 3 years. Had a very interesting story, which is in my book, that talked about we had an emergency in our aircraft, our
Yes, we were reading
EA6A,
that.
right, and had to eject over the ocean. And my anniversary was just recently, it's February 11th.
Of that incident.
Yes. And so it was 1991. And so every year, my pilot, Stan Parsons, and I will email or call or text each other to say happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
So can you describe that event in a little more detail?
So we were flying with another A6 against an aircraft carrier outside of Jacksonville, Florida. And our mission in that squadron was to act like the enemy. So we would go out and we would train other squadrons, ships in the military. We would act like the enemy. So then they would be trained when they would go on, their cruise deployments in what enemy tactics were. And so we flew up to Jacksonville. It was in February. It was, warmer in Key West. The water was still quite cold. But so we flew against the forestall, and we came off of the carrier. We call it the boat. The aircraft carriers are called boats to people in the military. We started to head back to Patrick Air Force Base to get gas because we were going out in the afternoon for another flight. And then we would RTB, return to base back to Key West. And so as we came off and started to climb and increase our airspeed, the aircraft shuddered a little bit, almost like 0G, like when you go up in an elevator and you have that weird settling feeling. That's what it felt like. And at the same time, simultaneously, a bunch of the master caution lights appeared, and we had a hydraulic failure. There's 2 hydraulic systems in the A6 and a backup system. So one of the hydraulic systems had failed. I pulled out our pocket checklist, our PCL. I also called over the radio and said, hey, this is Gulf Delta 110. 110 is our aircraft side number. We're declaring emergency. We need to take an arrested landing. Put your hook down. You can't stop when you don't have hydraulics or even partial hydraulics. One of the precautions is you put your arresting hook down and you land with an airport with an arresting gear. So we changed our destination from Patrick Air Force Base over to Naval Air Station. I think it was Jacksonville. Because they have arresting gear there. And so we started going through our PCL, our pocket checklist, and probably, time really stands still.
I can imagine.
When you're in a situation like that. And it must have been like 2.5 to 3 minutes after the fact we learned, but we lost the other hydraulic system. And in the A6, if you don't have hydraulics, you don't have any control over any of your surfaces. Your flaps, your slats, your gear, you have no control.
But meanwhile, you're going how fast?
We were maybe going 270 knots, and we were at 15,000 feet.
Okay.
So so at that point, you have your backup hydraulic system, but unless you're straight and level, you're going to start rolling out of control, and you won't have any control of your surfaces. And so we had what was called an asymmetric load. We had more weight on one wing than the other, so that caused us to start rolling out of control. And the pilot said, I don't have control, eject. And it's in my book, and he's written a couple articles about it. I looked over at him and I said, what? And he said, I don't have control, eject. And he had his hand all the way back. So, and he had the rudder all the way down, and there was no control over the aircraft. So in the A6, you have to eject yourself. Some aircraft, if you pull the ejection handle, it causes everyone to go within a certain period of time separately, obviously.
Right.
But in that version of that aircraft, we both had to eject ourselves. So I went first.
Front and back, is that?
No, side by side.
Side by side, okay.
Side by side. And in this aircraft also, you go through the canopy. So your seat.
Just like the movies.
Yeah. So some, like, remember in Top Gun, the canopy blew?
Yeah.
And I think Goose
Hit it too hard.
Yes, and he died.
Right.
So sometimes things will malfunction.
Sure.
Yeah, and he hit it. So that was, so you go through the canopy in the A6. There's, huge explosion. I remember I had a kneeboard on with yellow paper, and Stan said he remembers the paper's just flying everywhere like confetti. And so you ride up the rails, and depending on your altitude determines whether you get an automatic parachute, like if your seat man separation, it's called. So at, I think it's 11,000 plus or minus 1,500 feet, you'll get a parachute.
Automatic?
Yeah, your seat will go away, you'll get your parachute, the whole sequence. But if you're, for example, at 20,000 feet, you're going to free fall from 20,000 down to approximately 11,000 feet.
Wow.
Now, will it kick on by itself, or you have to pull at 11,000?
No, you can beat the seat. You can pull a handle, but thankfully we were at 15,000 feet when we ejected, and I blacked out. And by the time I came to, I was in my parachute, so my seat, it automatically happened.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So like you make it sound you make it sound like it's boom, 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 boom. The reason why you knew what to do was because of all the intense training. Like you just,
Right.
it was like, it was like second nature to you. Like all of
Right.
that, this is happening, that's happening. Like, is it because of the intense training?
It is. I mean, and you know, when you're in that situation, you kind of put your emotions aside because you know what you need to do. And I mean, you never expect for it to happen. I mean,
Right.
you know, I never expected that to happen. But you do train for it. And the military is so great. I mean, there's a saying, you fight like you train and you train like you fight. And so you go through all the training and in flight school, and then you have, annual refreshers, and you go through all the swim training. I mean, they pretty much try to kill you in the water. I mean, this, it's pretty intense. So the training's really great. And so, yeah, you just go through and you have all these little acronyms, of what you're supposed to do next. And yeah, your training just kicks in.
So you landed in the water?
So I remember I came to, and I had been wearing glasses that day. I usually wear contacts, but my glasses had flown off, and my vision's not great, and I couldn't see where Stan was. I could barely see the shoreline. We were about 50 miles off the coast over the water. And so I started going through all my procedures. I released my raft, and in your CPAN there is a part of it is your raft, and when you release it, there's a lanyard that connects to your seat pan, and your raft will then deploy, automatically inflate.
Right.
So it's about 10 feet below you, but connected to you. And so you also know that when you get about 10 feet above the water, you put your hands up on your Coke fittings. You're connected to your parachute by 4 different connections. There's 2 up top and 2 down below. And so you put your hands up on your Coke fitting, and then as soon as you're about 10 feet above the water, you release. So your parachute goes away, so it doesn't go on top of you and you get in the water. And that's the big fear.
Yeah.
And so I landed in the water, and then I went over and I climbed into my raft. And so I looked down at my watch. My watch was broken. And I still have my watch that I put in a scrapbook. But so I climbed in my raft. I probably was in the raft for about an hour. I'd pulled out my radio, and the folks that maintained my gear, I was a division officer for those maintainers. And so they kept my gear in really great shape. I mean, everyone's gear, but they were really attentive to my gear. And every day I would go flying, I would always check my radio. But for some reason that day, we were in a hurry walking to the jet. I just said, I didn't check my radio. It's the first time I did not check my radio.
Figures, right?
My radio was dead.
Oh.
And there's an interesting story about that years later. But so I had no communication. And so I'm in the ocean, and so I started going through all my stuff, and I pulled out a sea dye marker, and it goes out about 5 miles, and it's either fluorescent orange or green. And so I put that in the water, and it probably was about an hour that I saw a P-3 overhead. It's a huge prop aircraft. Right. And they were rocking their wings and flying in a figure 8. So I knew that they saw me.
Right.
And so I was so thankful. And, I remember, I wasn't afraid per se, but I think I was in shock really more than anything. And I just remember praying. I was like, God, I will give you one more chance if you get me out of this. And he's like, yeah, right. I'm going to give you another chance. So, I then took out, you have pencil flares in your life preserver unit, and those are, especially in the middle of the day, it was 1:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah, sunny.
And you pop those off it's very rare that anyone's going to see you unless they're right above you. So I thought, okay, I'll pop off a couple pencil flares. And within minutes, there were a bunch of helicopters swarming around me. And a search and rescue swimmer, a SAR swimmer, came down, rappelled down, and swam over to me. And he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Oh my gosh, you're a girl." And so he put me in a horse collar and, thumbs up, and they took me up to the helicopter. He and I traded name tags, and I still keep in touch with him every now and then. I actually reconnected with him after my book was published. And and Stan, my pilot, was picked up by another helicopter.
Where was the aircraft? How far away from you guys? Do you have any idea?
The jet, you mean when it went down?
Yeah.
They look for it for weeks afterwards, and they could never find it. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. This whole story has kind of come, full circle because when my book was published, the pilot of the helicopter that rescued me, his name is Stephen Burry, and I had never spoken with him after the fact. And but he found me after my book was published, and he said, "Hey, could I call you and talk about the accident?" I was like, "Okay, And so he called me up, and he said, we walked through the whole emergency, and he said, "Was your radio really dead?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Because we called out over the radio, pop your smoke, and the moment we said that, we saw your pencil flare." He said, "So somebody was really looking out for you that day."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
scary.
and he and I and the pilot, Stan, we spoke at a conference, the first time we've all been together and the first time we've met him in person. But the first time Stan and I told our story together was in front of a ejection seat conference down in Maryland about 2 years ago. And so it was just really cool, to be with them. But I was the first woman out of 6,000 ejections to eject from a Martin Baker seat.
Right.
And so after the ejection, it's a British company, they call me up. And they said, "We give all the guys ties when they eject. What do you want? Do you want the tie or something else?" And I said, "Oh, I'll leave it up to you guys." And so a couple weeks later, actually it was a couple months later, because they had a huge affair in Washington, D.C., where they were representing 6,000 lives saved. And that was during the Gulf War. It's right after the Gulf War. And they presented me with this little pewter pin, and as the first woman ejectee. But it was a really amazing experience because there were people there, there were men there, and there was a line of people waiting to meet me. And I was like, there were men there that ejected twice in Vietnam, like John McCain era people.
Right.
And it was just such an honor to be with them, and it was incredible. But but I've kept in touch with the company, with Martin Baker, and just recently I actually wore a little memento of it today. It's a Bremont watch, and Bremont had a couple years ago came out with a watch for just ejectees. And another friend of mine and I, she's an ejectee also, and we kept posting on social media because the watches are expensive, they're like $5,000. And we're like, "Hey, you should let us wear it." And they're big. Like, I'm not a big watch person. My husband really is, but so we're like, we'll wear the watch and give you feedback.
Right.
And they're like, yeah. But they offered it. They were offering it to ejectees for half price, and my husband surprised me with the watch a year ago. And so I wear it, and the interesting thing about the watch is that they offer it to different types of communities. Like, there's ones for people that climb, and outdoorsy, and all different types of communities. But the one for ejectees has the red band on it, and so you have to prove that you're an ejectee to get the watch. So,
Is it guaranteed not to break if you eject again?
I don't know. I'm not going to try. I'm a medium risk taker, really.
Been there, done that. We're going to take a pass. So, as we were going through the book, a few things struck us. So, you decided not to write a book about yourself only.
Right.
You decided to be inclusive and talk about all these amazing women who you imagine some you met, maybe some you didn't meet.
Right.
What was the impetus for that? Like, you could have probably wrote a book just about Linda Maloney, but you decided to try and include as many people as you could possibly include in a book and share their stories and their families and what all what their struggles were. What was the impetus behind that?
And I've just kind of a quick jump in there.
Yeah.
It's called Military Fly Moms, not Military Fly Women.
Right.
Is there...
All the women are moms that are in the book.
Yeah.
Yes. Because So it's really my husband was the one that encouraged me to write my book, and for a couple years we didn't get married actually until my last tour in the military. I was 39, he was 40, and so we didn't start having our kids until we were in our 40s. So we're tired. We're old. We're old parents. We're tired. Yeah, that's right. So my husband had met author and editor on a train, and he was telling her my story. She's like, "Oh, she should write a book," but I really just felt like my story was just part of a bigger story.
It wasn't selfish at all. It was about including all these other women.
Yeah, because they all had because you know what? I'd spent my career in the military, and I would meet people, men in the military that had just had this vision, or even outside of the military, that had this vision of who women in the military were, and it was not accurate. And it's been my goal, like really, since I've left the military, to educate people on who women are in the military and who serves. It could be your mother, your sister, your daughter, your niece, it could be the girl next door, that we're no different. And I really felt like there was this perspective that we were a certain kind of person and we weren't. I didn't find that to be true. And I railed against that. And so it was my passion to share who these women were. And I just started reaching out to my network of women, and the idea just grew like crazy. I probably had 400 women that were initially interested in being in the book. We ended up with 70, and it took me 8 years because all the women were moms, and I was a new mom, and I was working part-time after I retired from the Navy. And it took me just a long time to get it all together. But it was my passion to share their stories. And also I wanted them to have their stories out there. In the legacy, I got really connected with this whole thing about passing down a legacy and what their legacy would be to their kids and to future generations. And so that was the impetus for the book.
It's like, I mean, the other thing I noticed too is you were part of that going through barriers, I guess, breaking barriers. You were part of that generation where it was one way when you went in,
right,
and then it changed.
Right.
And you even mentioned a little bit about the frustration a little bit inside, right, with all of these like preconceived notions of what women can do, what women can't do.
Right.
And my question is, I try and get my question not to be so long. My question is that, was it frustrating being like, hey, we can do this. We got this. We can do this. And then like for them not to, and then finally say, okay. Was that frustrating for you?
It was. And so, when you go through training, the same training with the guys, and then you get into the fleet, and then you're not given the same opportunity, it is frustrating. And it was when the law was changed, the combat exclusion law was repealed, and we all got the opportunity to go to regular fleet combat squadrons. It was very challenging. And I look back on it now, and I probably would have handled it a little bit differently. But there were, on the aircraft carrier I was in the first group of women that went to a combat squadron for a West Coast boat. They had West Coast and East Coast. And so for the Navy, I'm just speaking for the Navy, there were the West Coast carriers and East Coast carriers. And so I went to a West Coast carrier, and I was in the first group of women that went to the USS Abraham Lincoln. I think there's approximately 5,000 people on an aircraft carrier. At that time, then there were 500 women on the boat and about 50 women aviators. So you definitely were living life in a fishbowl, and it was difficult. There were people that absolutely did not want us there. And I always put them in a couple different categories. There were the ones that absolutely hated us. There were the ones that were so supportive, and they typically were the minorities, the guys who were African American and Hispanic. And some of those guys are still my best friends because they knew what it was like, and they were so supportive. And then there were the guys that could care less, and they were usually guys that were pretty happy in their own right, and they were good. They were good guys. And then they're the ones that I had the real issue with, the ones that would be your buddy when it's, one-on-one, but you get them in a crowd and they turn on you. And I actually appreciated the guys that were outright hated us, because you knew where they stood, and I often wonder if I ever ran into them now, that group and the other group, that, how, if they had daughters, how are they with their daughters? because they were so intimidated by us, and they were so, like, they didn't want us there for whatever reason. I just think it was stupid, and
I think it's tough when someone's on the wrong side of history and they just can't see it.
right.
Was there any
Because
other-
the aircraft doesn't know if you're a man or a woman. If you're good, you're good.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm telling you, people, would have this view that, we were just kind of let slide through the program. But the military's not going to let you fly an $80 million jet,
If you can't.
if you're not competent. Yeah.
Was there ever any like experience you had from like a higher up that just blew your mind in the thought process? That was like, I can't believe
Just had this
I'm on the
conversation.
receiving end of something so chauvinistic or anything of that nature?
You know what? People always say that, were you ever sexually harassed? And no, I wasn't. I ran into a lot of inappropriate attitudes and behaviors.
Really?
But typically, senior leaders were relatively supportive overall. There was one time on the carrier that I wouldn't say it was chauvinistic, but the deputy CAG, the deputy carrier air group commander, had a meeting with all the women aviators, and he had tea and cookies in the stateroom. They would never do that for it. We're like, give me a break.
Wow, that is...
Yeah. Or they kept us sequestered in a little area on the carrier where we slept. Our staterooms were all together.
Yeah.
And that they said that was to protect us,
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
But, because, you'd have to walk to the shower. So that
Right,
was
right,
fine.
right.
But the whole tea and cookies, or they wanted us all to take pregnancy tests at the beginning of the cruise. And we're like, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
No.
Well, they just I constantly got like a percentage of 98% professional, 2% jerks.
And they're the ones that ruined the water,
Right.
ruined the soup for all of it because, yeah, and it was difficult. I mean, it definitely was. And I think now it is better, but we still, because there's so few women that fly in the military, the percentages, I think it's like less than 5%. And so I think,
Even today.
yes, even today, because it's hard. And you'll notice if you read any of the stories, especially if the couple is dual military,
Right.
it's hard to have a family. And I mean, it's just realistic. That's what happens,
I
and
mean, especially if you're going in different directions.
yes. And if you're not, maybe one's flying prop aircraft, one's flying helicopter, maybe you're not, in the same community even, and it is hard. And you have to determine what your priorities are and how you're going to make it work. Even if you're not dual military, you can't work from home. You can't work remote.
Right.
And so
You have to be there to fly
you
the
have
plane.
to be there. Yeah. Or even any other job in the military too. And it is difficult. And most of the time you see that the woman is the one that decides to get out or goes into the reserves. But even nowadays, the reserve community, they deploy a lot.
Right, right.
Over the last 10 years, they've deployed a lot more than they used to.
Wow.
That's crazy. How did you, so you go in at one time, 20 years is a long time.
But it happened like that.
It
It
happened
went
like
so
that.
Fast.
But
yeah.
did you must have seen some progress.
I
little
did.
bit? I think,
Yes,
yes.
but it's all
different.
about leadership. Even when it was difficult, when you have a good leader, it makes all the difference. It rolls downhill.
Sure.
And there are good leaders and there's bad leaders. So. Yeah.
So you decided to have a family, of course, after you got out of the military. So you didn't have
So
somebody-
during my last year,
Last year.
so I met my husband before my last tour. Tours are usually 4 years. And so we got married, and I still had another 4 years in the military, but I was at a shore duty tour.
No.
I wasn't flying.
Okay.
And where'd you meet him?
So we have an interesting story. We met online, and I always tell people, don't do even though nowadays people do that all the
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
but we got married in 2001, and we met through a Christian online dating service. I did it for a couple months, and I said, this isn't for me.
Well, my cousin got married, Christian online
Yeah,
service.
I was like, I'm not a
She
good
married,
blind
20
dater. Like I
years.
did, it wasn't my thing, And so, but he and I kept in touch via email over maybe 2 years, and like every now and then we would say, hey, how you doing? And then at some point, it was never romantic, and we just decided he was going to be down in the same area where I was living, and we met, and it was
And what was he doing at that time? Like,
So he was in the same industry that he is right now. He
Right.
works for Verizon. He's an executive with Verizon, so works in the security cybersecurity world.
Gotcha.
So,
It's an important area.
Important area, especially nowadays,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
So now you decide to, your time's up. You're going to do
Right.
your 20 years. You're going
Right.
to move on to your next career. It must be for people who are getting to that 20-year mark in the military and they're deciding to move on. It's a big challenge because, and it's like, what am I going to do? And it must be a lot of thought must go into it. And you decided to start a whole nother business, which I wish you could talk about a little bit.
Right. Well, at that point is when I started my book. And then for about 10 years, I worked for a handful of different defense companies as a project manager. And, then after my book was published, I started doing a little bit of speaking.
Public speaking.
And, but it was difficult to travel because my kids were younger. My husband travels quite a bit. And I started thinking about, okay, what are the next steps? And I should have been an event planner in my previous life because I love just coordinating and planning and networking. And I met another woman veteran, and she and I were collaborating for about a year, just about that whole notion of sharing with people about who women in the military are. And we came upon this idea of starting a Women Veteran Speakers Bureau. And
It's a great idea.
yeah, so we did it for about 2 years, and we had a different name than I have now and a different business model. But I wanted to grow the business. We only had like 10 women, and so we were really learning the business. And then
A lot of corporate speaking?
yes, I wanted to grow it. I wanted to add more women, and she was too busy. She's like me. She has a lot of different things going on, and so I took it over. I changed the name, and we added. I think we have almost 50 women now, and it's called Women Veteran Speakers. And the common denominator, obviously, is all the women are veterans, whether it was 4 years or 30 years. But another interesting thing is that we primarily market towards corporations, colleges, universities, professional organizations, professional conferences, and last but not least, veteran organizations. Although we don't actually have a lot of speakers. I say speaker, but it's speakers, coaches, trainers, facilitators. And we don't really market too much to the veteran community because, unfortunately, they don't have a lot of money to pay speakers. But and I'm very protective of our brand in the fact that all of my speakers have a very varied toolbox. I have several women who are doctors, have a doctorate. One has a doctorate in economics. One has a doctorate in, she was a chiropractor. I have lawyers, authors, women that are just coaches. And so we really market, to that corporate community, really, in a lot of colleges and universities.
That's great to have such a varied group to pull from.
Yeah, they're all really just great, really skilled, and they all have their own businesses.
Do they speak a lot on leadership and leadership techniques?
They do.
Or just life?
Several. There's every single topic you can imagine, yeah.
I mean, and then you were able to transition to that, and like how often now that your kids are a little older, are you on the speaking circuit? Are you talking?
I'm not speaking very much at all.
No?
Maybe once a year.
Oh, okay.
Only because the business takes so much of my time. I mean, I really could do it a lot more. And my kids are very busy. My kids, I spend probably half my time taking them all over.
Right.
So
Yeah. Activities can take up a good portion of the day a lot of times.
Right.
So, yeah.
And you've probably met a lot of interesting people, had a lot of interesting experiences in the second part of your career.
I have, yeah. So we have all of our speakers. Most of them are not, they're not at the highest tier. They're not like $50,000, $100,000 speakers. They probably range, it's like mid-level speakers. And several of our speakers have moved on to exclusive speakers bureaus, which I love. We don't require our speakers to be exclusive with us.
Right.
They can belong to a couple different speakers bureaus if they want. But I spend a lot of my time marketing. I do a lot of marketing them to conferences, and I've been relatively successful. It's probably my 4th year in, and we're starting to really see the fruits of our labor. I have only one person that works with me, so I do a lot of it, myself. Yeah.
I also think that after the Vietnam War and all that bit, I think even as I noticed through my course of my life, it seems like we have or maybe as a country, we've really realized and learned that we have such a high respect for our military, right?
Right.
And you see these amazing bravery and educated people and like, you know, the salt of the earth, and they come out and they have so much to give society that this is just a great idea. They can share their experiences, and we can all learn from them.
Right. Well, the women in my agency, they do share. Not every single event or speaking event is about their experiences. And when for example, if I have a new speaker come into my agency, and we're talking about her portfolio of what what her topics would be. And I always say, sometimes you'll go into an event and you'll talk maybe a little bit about your military experiences. And whereas another event, you may talk a lot about it, so it just really all depends because, like I said, we target several different types of clients. So they will hire someone from my agency because they're a veteran, but that's not the whole story.
Right.
Yeah, it depends on what their event. Maybe it's a high-performing sales event. So the speaker has to have some experience,
Sure.
some credibility, some expertise in high-performing sales. And they will tie their military experience maybe to that topic. Maybe they'll have an example or a story. So maybe they'll talk a little bit about their military experience, and maybe they, will talk a lot about it. It just all depends. And you're right. I mean, there's just amazing people. The military is such a great platform for training leaders, and I always say that you're a leader at any level in the military. You will have leaders, you'll be a leader. I mean, you learn leadership. It's inherent in what we do in the military because it's all about mission accomplishment,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I follow this guy. Was Jocko? You ever heard Jocko?
No, I have to look him up.
Jocko Willing.
No.
He's a former Navy SEAL.
Is he the African American?
No. That's David Goggins.
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
I follow
think-
Goggins. Goggins is unbelievable. I sent you YouTube clips on Goggins. Goggins is on another level.
Yeah,
But Jocko, he talks all about leadership.
Right.
And he's a former Navy SEAL, and he has a great TED talk if you ever want to listen to it. Really, really good. But so I find like all of these retired military people giving so much back to society, and then like moving on into the private sector,
Right.
and just really killing it. But I feel like you are trying to get as many of these women out there so they can share their stories, and it's not like it's because they were in the military, but it was a large part of, like you said, it built leadership.
Right.
It put a foundation to them, right? And
Right.
now they're just taking it to the next level.
Right. And I think there's a big emphasis nowadays on women in the military and recognizing that women serve also. Because I know it drives many of us crazy when it's always assumed that it's our husband that served. And and say, I serve too, and I, some women say, I don't identify as a veteran. And I'm like, why not? I'm very
In the Memorial Day, Memorial Day
I'm
parade.
proud of it. I mean, I would do it all again. I loved it so much, and I really try to encourage my kids. I don't think either one of my boys really are that interested in it, but I just think it's so important for people in general to serve in one way or another in our country. And then back to your comment about leadership, it's all about relationships. I think leadership really starts at relationships and building those relationships. And you really, build relationships in the military because a lot of times you're in confined spaces, and people really get to know you on a personal and a professional level. And I remember when I was on the aircraft carrier, and I was a division officer, and I would try to go down to the spaces where my maintenance guys worked in the morning and in the evening. I had a senior chief that worked for me, Senior Chief Donati. I would love to run into him nowadays. He was from Puerto Rico originally, and he used to always say, Lieutenant, you don't need to go down there to those spaces. I got it covered. But I thought, you know what? I'm their division officer. They need to see me, other than me walking out to my jet and saying, hey, Lieutenant, how's it going? So I used to go down there in the morning and down there in the evening just to shoot the breeze with them. And not that it was about anything, structured. Maybe I would go down and just shine my shoes with them. And I would just, hey, how's it going? How's everything going back home? Because we're on a 6-month deployment. And, are you taking any classes on the boat? Whatever. And because, people want to know that they're valued in life. It doesn't matter if you're an E1, you're a young, airman, or you're an admiral. People want to know that they're valued. And those folks, those women and men, you don't make a lot of money as a young enlisted person, but you're up on that carrier deck. It's dangerous. You see people die. I mean, it's dangerous up there, And the Navy's very, on the aircraft carrier, it's very safety conscious. I mean, obviously there's a lot of training, but it's a dangerous environment. You have to have your head on a swivel, especially at night. And those folks are up there all the time. It runs sometimes 24/7. And so I used to think a lot about, what would motivate them to work hard and they make no money, really no money. And I learned at a young age, it's all about, just creating relationships with them. And I remember when I left the boat, they gave me a gift. It was I think it's 50 pounds. It's a tail hook. It's the end of a tail hook off a jet. And I still have it in my basement. And I take it with me sometimes when I speak to schools, but that's one thing I think it's evident even in any job that you're in. It's all about relationships,
And the relationship between people who are above you and below you,
right.
as far as like
you're interdependent. Though.
Right,
It's
It's
really
if you
important.
treat people badly, how can you expect them to be loyal to you or work hard? And especially in a situation like that, I mean, when your life
I
depends
was gonna
on
say,
it.
you want them to be nothing but on your side in every
Yes,
capacity.
exactly.
Wow.
It's so weird, but even though in the military you have a higher rank, but it is true though that respect is earned.
Yeah.
Like you could have the rank.
Oh, yeah.
But if the people don't respect you, I mean,
Yeah.
they'll do everything.
And
they have to.
I mean, people know,
But when they respect you,
Yeah, they'll do any. Yeah, they'll.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
and where's that more important than in the military? I mean, yeah.
Life on the line in
So,
most cases.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
oh my god.
Yeah.
Now, do you ever catch up with the people from the book?
I do keep. So some of the women I knew going into the book, many of them I got to know.
Right.
So I network quite a bit, on social media. So I do keep in touch with many of them, and so our paths have crossed many, many times. Yeah.
Are any of them speakers?
I'm trying to think of any of them. One of the women in the book actually started her own speakers agency just last year. It's just for fighter women that were fighter pilots. But I'm trying to remember. So I think there are a couple that are speaking. So yeah.
Yeah.
I just find the whole concept to be very fascinating.
Yeah, I the situation with the kids and all, with moving from place to place all the time, with different kind of schedules between parents situation.
Right.
That kind of was fascinating, that the kids were just kind of, adjusting to all these different things that would happen with their parents, especially
Right.
when the husband and wife were both in the military.
And you see situations where, you have to, and women are really good about sharing with other women about, what works, what doesn't work,
Right.
and networking. Like maybe you need an au pair, you need a live out nanny, a live in nanny, you need, all the different things that you need to do to make it work. I just have so much respect for many of those women that, were flying, in the fleet, flying in combat and raising kids. I had my kids, at the end of my career, and it was a little bit easier. And you don't really get a good appreciation of that, if you're not doing it, how hard it can be.
Right. A lot of times it's
know.
like 20 years that people are in it, and then
Right.
is that because of like the pension associated with it?
Yes. So if you serve 20 years, you get a military retirement. So I get a military retirement now. Also, my medical insurance it's very minimum, very
Right.
minimal. I mean, my insurance is wonderful, but we pay very little for it. And it's such a gift. I feel I feel so blessed to
That's
have
nice.
that.
Today's day and age, that's
I know.
huge. That's
Yeah,
really
it is
huge.
really good.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, the book was very intriguing. I mean, to see behind the scenes, all these different people's lives going, kind of growing within the military
Right.
and all, and just what they faced.
I've thought about doing like an update of where we are now because the
Right.
book was published in 2012, but I think it's my first and only book. I don't think I'm going to go down that path
Right.
again.
Everyone has one book in them.
That's all I got. I think that's all I got.
Yeah.
Everyone's got one good book in them, they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't fly anymore, do you?
No. My husband is actually a CFI, certified flight instructor,
Oh,
and he's
okay.
not. He's been keeping his quals up. He hasn't been flying because he's way too busy. Our life is. We're like in the trenches right now.
Right.
You know, I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they're big time swimmers, and they swim 5 to 6 days a week.
Right.
My 13-year-old also, he just got his black belt and with Anthony.
Yeah.
He just got his
Yeah.
black belt in MMA, and so we're very busy.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
we don't have time. My husband always says is that's not something that you can do part time.
Right.
Is fly.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, when I left the military, I was pretty much done with that. And you know what you were talking about earlier about making decisions when I retired, I was really ready to be done with it. I mean, I loved it, but I was ready to be a mom.
Ran
And-
through its cycle.
Yeah. My kids, I just had my first child the year I retired. And then a couple years later, I had my next one. So I was, and I really wanted to have kids, and that was that became more of my focus, and I was okay with being out.
Different parts of life.
Yeah,
as
because I
we
know
go on.
sometimes people do struggle with getting out of the military, but I was ready. I was ready to move on.
I love
You
that
know?
you can have whatever you want, just not at the same time. That's
Yeah.
what I kept hearing from that.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool.
Yeah,
and
you
that
can't.
patience, and it will come, but you can't always be all at the same time.
And I think people, you want that. You want everything all at once,
Yeah.
And my husband and I were just having that conversation on the way over that we're in the stage right now of with our kids, of being so crazy busy, but in an instant they're going to be gone. And I know I'm already feeling like I'm grieving it,
Between me and him, we have
Yeah,
three go off to college this year,
Yeah.
so it's like, oof.
Yeah, it goes by quick.
Yeah.
And it's like a void. Even though you have another one there, it's kind of like that person's
the
never gonna be
house
the
gets
same.
so quiet.
So it's gonna
Yeah,
be,
I'm not looking forward to
Yeah.
it. Even I try to appreciate it. I don't always, but I try to appreciate it, now.
It's like you walk in their rooms and like there's no more clothes on the floor. And everything's
It's
neat.
clean.
It's
Why is it clean?
Where you vacuumed last time, the lines are still there.
Yeah.
Like it's like it's
Yeah.
just like a music. You're like, wait a second, I spent the last 18 years
Yeah.
yelling.
My husband's like, "Whoa, I can't wait!" But I think he's gonna not. I think he's gonna say the same thing as you guys.
Yeah. When it gets there, it's a different
It's
experience.
different experience. Different
But-
experience. Different experience.
But it's a positive, good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So, Linda, to tie into the podcast, you're a great leader, and you teach leadership through your talking and all of the stuff that you do, public interviews and your book. What would you give our audience about being middle-aged? What would you say? Would you say anything to them before we close up here?
So I feel like I think about this a lot. I think I started thinking about it really a lot more 2 years ago when my mom passed away, and I didn't think about, life in terms of, you only have so many more years to go. And, but I feel like that I am not, there aren't enough hours in the day for me. Like I still have so much to do in life. And so I think I'm just starting. I mean, I just think there's a lot of life to live. And I would just encourage people that, just because we're middle age, I mean, there's just so many things to do and see in this world. And, I'm still, ready to do a lot more,
No, I got to grab it because it does go by quick.
Absolutely.
It's certainly the case. So.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just, as a matter of fact, I just got involved in this project a year ago, actually been 2 years. It's called Proudly She Served. I had met this artist, his name's Steve Alpert, and he lives in New York. And someone had given him my name, and he contacted me. And my husband's like, I don't know how you get caught up in all this stuff. Like you always like.
That's what he said when you were driving over here today.
I always get involved in this stuff. So he had this vision. He's an artist, and he started painting military portraits a couple years ago, and he had this vision to paint women, military women veterans, and he wanted to start this project. And so he had painted one, and this woman had lost her arm. And so long story short, we started this project called Proudly She Served. We're going to have a big gala event in a year from now, hopefully at the Women Memorial in Washington, D.C., next to Arlington National Cemetery. And we have 10 women portraits. And so if anyone in your podcast is interested in looking, it's called ProudlySheServed.com. And we actually, Steve and I are going down to D.C. this week. Our number 10 is Senator Tammy Duckworth. and he's going to be painting her. And but the women are just amazing, and they're like, some of them are well known. One, Nicole Malachowski, she's the first woman Thunderbird pilot. She's one of the women he's painting. Another one is Kirstie Ennis. She lost a leg, but she's flying, or she's climbing every single mountain in the world. She's very amazing.
Wow.
But some of the women are just everyday heroes, everyday, women veterans. And so, so I'm very active in that right now. So I burn the midnight oil a lot. So like I said, I'm just getting started. And, but it's something that's highlighting women in the military, strong, feminine women.
Right.
And, portraying them for who they are,
When you're around these, like type A types, who are like...
Do you think I'm type A?
Yeah, a little bit type A. I think your husband would agree with me on that one.
He's type A too, though.
Yeah, you got a double type A in
Yeah.
there. But I mean, you get an energy from speaking to great people like this, like the lady who climbs them. I mean, like, do you like that energy you get when you're talking to some of these extraordinary people?
Yeah, I'm just like, I feel so
feel the
blessed
energy
because
off
I
them.
have met so many amazing people. One other woman who just joined my bureau, who I've been friends with for 30 years, is Tammy Jo Schultz. And I don't know if you know that name, but she it's Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, flies for Southwest Airlines. She was the pilot about 2 years ago now that landed that aircraft where there was an issue where the woman died. And they landed in Philadelphia, but if you Google that, you will see her. And she's speaking all over the country now. And she's just had a book published, and she's going to have a movie out this year about her.
Wow.
And so she's like like how Sully was.
Right.
Yeah,
The female
but yeah,
Sully.
Tammy Jo Schultz. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
great.
but we've been friends for 30 years. She was in our wedding.
Oh,
And
that's great.
yeah.
That's great. That's
But I've
awesome.
I'm just so blessed because I've been associated and met just so many amazing people along my journey.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
know.
No, it sounds incredible.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Well, I think we're done, Rob.
I think we're wrapping up.
Wrapping up here.
All right.
All right, wrapping up here.
This is some.
So thank you for joining us today on the Help Me I'm Middle Aged podcast. If you could just remember to scroll down, hit the subscribe button, and if you like what you heard, share it amongst friends. That would be awesome. So until next time, we'll see you.
right.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for coming
Thanks
out,
for
Miss
coming.
Maloney.
Yes,
Thank you.
Lynn.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.